Welcome to Bella's World, where real-life drama meets spicy secrets. Subscribe to never miss a new story.
My husband Atlas was looking for mints in my purse when he found unused protection and a receipt from the Marriott Hotel from last Saturday. His face went pale when he realized that last Saturday was our third wedding anniversary, which I had supposedly spent at Jade's girls' night out. He looked at me and asked who I was sleeping with in a hotel while he waited at home with a romantic dinner and a gift. When I tried to lie that the protection was from Jade, Atlas showed me the receipt. A room for two under the name Mr. and Mrs. K. Morrison. Before I walk you through this whole story from the beginning, I have a small favor to ask. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and let me know in the comments. What city are you watching from? It's always amazing to see how far this audience reaches. I tried to lie about the protection being from Jade, claiming she'd given them to me as a joke at her bachelorette party months ago. But Atlas wasn't buying it. He held up the hotel receipt and asked why it was dated last Saturday, our anniversary, and why it was under the name Mr. and Mrs. K. Morrison. I could see in his eyes that he already knew the answer. When I couldn't explain the receipt, Atlas asked directly if I'd spent our anniversary with Kieran while he waited at home with dinner and gifts. His voice was calm, but I could hear the pain underneath. I tried to deny it, but Atlas said he wasn't stupid and that all the pieces were falling into place. My late nights, my distant behavior, my lies about girls' nights out. Atlas asked how long this had been going on and whether I'd been planning to leave him for Kieran. I couldn't answer because the truth was that Kieran had already dumped me, saying our night together was a mistake. Atlas saw my hesitation and said he understood everything he needed to know about where I stood. He told me he'd trusted me completely and never suspected I was capable of something like this. Atlas said he'd spent our anniversary cooking my favorite meal and setting up a romantic evening, excited to celebrate 3 years of marriage, while I was in a hotel bed with another man. The disappointment in his voice was worse than if he'd screamed at me. Atlas said he needed time to think and that he'd be staying at his brother's house. He packed a bag while I begged him to let me explain, but he said there was nothing I could say that would change what I'd done. He left that night, and I realized I'd lost the best man I'd ever known for someone who didn't even want me. Morrison is my ex Kieran's last name, who I spent the night with instead of celebrating our anniversary with Atlas. Now I'm sitting alone, having lost both men. And it all started a month ago when Kieran messaged me on Instagram. My name is Dakota. I'm 29 years old, and I've been married to Atlas for 3 years. He's 32 and works as a software engineer, making $120,000 a year. Atlas is reliable, predictable, and plans our future with kids and a house. He gives thoughtful gifts, remembers anniversaries, and makes breakfast in bed. I married him after pressure from my mother, who kept saying I was already 26, and good men don't wait forever. I dated Kieran for 4 years in college. Passionate, intense relationships that made me feel alive. Kieran was spontaneous and exciting, always making me feel desired in ways I'd never experienced. We broke up because he wasn't ready for serious commitment, but I never stopped comparing every man to him, including Atlas. Atlas is a good husband, but life with him became so predictable. He talks about engineering projects I don't care about, plans romantic evenings that feel routine, and dreams about suburbs and school districts. I felt like I was suffocating in a life that looked perfect on paper, but felt empty inside. A month ago, Kieran messaged me out of nowhere after 5 years of silence. He said he'd seen my wedding photos, and I looked absolutely stunning. He asked if we could meet for coffee as old friends, just to catch up. I felt that familiar excitement I hadn't experienced in years, and I agreed without thinking about the consequences. I lied to Atlas about meeting a girlfriend and went to see Kieran at a downtown cafe. He looked even better than I remembered. Successful lawyer, in great shape, still charming as ever. Kieran told me about his travels, interesting work, and exciting lifestyle. Sitting there listening to him, I couldn't help but compare it to my evenings at home with Atlas watching Netflix. Kieran started reminiscing about our passionate moments together, asking if I remembered that night in Miami or our weekend in the mountains. He said breaking up with me was the biggest mistake of his life, that no one had ever understood him the way I did. I felt myself melting, remembering what it was like to feel truly desired and alive. We agreed to meet again just to talk, and I convinced myself it was innocent friendship with an ex. But soon we were meeting 2 or 3 times a week, and I was lying to Atlas constantly about working late or meeting girlfriends. Kieran would take me to expensive restaurants Atlas would never choose, buy me cocktails, and make me feel special and appreciated. Kieran began pushing for physical intimacy, starting with innocent touches and lingering hugs. He'd tell me how much he missed our connection, how I was still the most beautiful woman he'd ever known. I found myself thinking about him constantly, comparing every gesture Atlas made to what Kieran would do instead. When our third anniversary approached, Atlas planned everything perfectly as usual. He booked our favorite restaurant, bought an expensive necklace, and prepared a romantic evening at home. He told me how grateful he was for our marriage and how much he loved me. But instead of feeling happy, I felt trapped and resentful of his predictable romance. That's when Kieran made his move. He said he couldn't just be friends anymore, that we needed to find out if we still had that special connection. He suggested spending one night together at a hotel to see if we had a future. When I hesitated, he said we owed it to ourselves to know the truth before I spent my whole life wondering what if. I knew it was wrong, but I was so tired of feeling dead inside my marriage. Kieran picked the date deliberately. Saturday night, our anniversary. I told Atlas I was going to Jade's girls' night out, bought new lingerie and protection, and created an elaborate lie about my evening plans. Atlas believed every word. He even offered to drop me off at Jade's house, but I said she was picking me up. I felt terrible lying to his trusting face, but I convinced myself I needed to know if my feelings for Kieran were real before wasting more years in the wrong marriage. Kieran booked us a room at the Marriott under Mr. and Mrs. K. Morrison, which should have been a red flag but felt romantic at the time. I arrived wearing my new dress and feeling like I was on a real date for the first time in years. Kieran had ordered champagne and room service, creating the perfect seductive atmosphere. We talked for hours about our past relationship and how much we'd missed each other. Kieran said he'd thought about me every day for 5 years, that letting me go was the stupidest thing he'd ever done. I felt more alive and desired than I had since our college days. The passion between us was everything I remembered, and more. We spent the entire night together, and it was more intense than anything I'd experienced with Atlas. Kieran made me feel beautiful and wanted in ways my husband never had. He told me I was still the best thing that ever happened to him, that we belonged together despite all the time that had passed. In the morning, Kieran talked about our future together. He said I should leave Atlas and we could start the life we'd always planned. I imagined traveling with him, having adventures, feeling passionate and alive every day. We agreed to meet again in a few days to make concrete plans for my divorce. Meanwhile, Atlas was waiting at home with candles, flowers, and my favorite meal. He'd prepared the perfect anniversary celebration and bought me a beautiful necklace engraved with our wedding date. I had to sit there accepting his gift and pretending to be grateful while thinking about Kieran and our night together. I felt terrible about lying, but I was also excited about finally having clarity about my feelings. I planned to tell Atlas about Kieran gradually, to prepare him for the divorce as gently as possible. I convinced myself I was doing the right thing by being honest about my needs, instead of living a lie. But when I met Kieran 3 days later, everything changed. He was cold and distant, completely different from the passionate man who'd made me feel so special. He said our night together was a mistake, a moment of weakness he regretted. He didn't want to be responsible for destroying my marriage to such a good man. I was devastated. I begged him to reconsider, reminding him of everything he'd said about our future together. Kieran claimed he'd been emotional and drunk, that I should forget what happened and focus on my marriage. He said Atlas was a good husband, and I should appreciate what I had instead of chasing fantasies. I tried to convince him we were meant to be together, that what we had was real love worth fighting for. But Kieran insisted it was over and asked me to leave him alone. I realized he'd used me for one night and had no intention of building a life together. I'd thrown away my marriage for a man who saw me as a temporary distraction. A week later, Atlas was looking for mints in my purse when he found the protection I'd bought and the hotel receipt. His face went white as he read the date and realized it was our anniversary. He asked who I'd been sleeping with while he waited at home with dinner and gifts. I tried to lie about the protection being from Jade, but Atlas showed me the receipt with Kieran's name on it. The evidence was undeniable. I'd spent our anniversary in a hotel with another man while my husband prepared a romantic celebration for me. Atlas asked how many times this had happened. and my silence told him everything. Atlas didn't yell or make a scene. He just looked at me with disappointment and said he understood what kind of person I really was. He asked if I planned to be with Kieran now, and I couldn't answer honestly because Kieran had already rejected me. Atlas saw the truth in my inability to respond. Within a week, Atlas had hired a lawyer and filed for divorce. He used the hotel receipt as evidence of adultery, which meant I lost most of our shared assets. The house Atlas had built for us, our savings, everything I'd taken for granted was gone because of one night with a man who didn't even want me. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. Atlas's lawyer presented the hotel receipt and testimony from Jade, confirming I'd lied about the girls' night. I had no defense against the evidence of my anniversary betrayal. The judge awarded Atlas almost everything, leaving me with minimal alimony and no claim to our beautiful home. Jade found out I'd used her as an alibi for my cheating and stopped speaking to me completely. She told all our mutual friends what I'd done, and they immediately took Atlas's side in the divorce. They said he'd been a devoted husband who deserved better than someone who would cheat on their anniversary. I lost my entire social circle overnight. My family was ashamed and disappointed when they learned the truth. My mother said she'd raised me better than to betray such a good husband, especially on our anniversary. My siblings stopped inviting me to family gatherings because they were embarrassed to explain my behavior to their spouses and children. Even my own family saw me as a disgrace. At work, the story of my anniversary affair spread like wildfire through the office. Colleagues whispered about the woman who cheated on her husband while he planned a romantic celebration. My boss started questioning my integrity and reliability, passing me over for promotions and important projects. Clients seemed uncomfortable working with someone who'd so publicly betrayed her marriage vows. The reputation damage extended beyond my workplace. People in our neighborhood had heard about the divorce scandal, and I'd get stares and whispers when I went to familiar places. Store clerks who used to chat friendly with Atlas and me would barely acknowledge me. I became a cautionary tale about ungrateful wives who threw away good marriages. Financially, I was devastated. I'd become accustomed to Atlas's engineer salary and our comfortable lifestyle, but now I was struggling to afford basic necessities. I had to move into a studio apartment in a rough neighborhood, selling my jewelry and designer clothes just to make rent. The contrast to my former life was stark and humiliating. Dating became impossible once men learned about my divorce circumstances. When they found out I'd cheated on my anniversary, they'd lose interest immediately. Nobody wanted to get involved with someone who had such a history of betrayal and deception. My dating profile matches would ghost me as soon as they Googled my name and found articles about the divorce. The professional consequences continued to multiply. Word spread through my industry about my personal scandal, and headhunters stopped calling with opportunities. When I applied for new positions, background checks would reveal the divorce details, and employers would withdraw their offers. My career trajectory was permanently damaged by one night of poor judgment. Social media became a source of constant pain. I'd see Atlas posting happy photos with Quinn, looking genuinely content in ways he'd never achieved with me. Meanwhile, Kieran was sharing pictures of romantic getaways with his lawyer girlfriend, building the kind of relationship I'd fantasized about having with him. Both men had moved on successfully, while I remained stuck in the consequences of my choices. The isolation was overwhelming. Weekends that used to be filled with couple activities and social gatherings were now spent alone in my cramped apartment. I'd order takeout and watch Netflix, remembering the elaborate meals Atlas used to cook and the thoughtful date nights he'd plan. The silence was deafening compared to our old life together. My mental health suffered as the full weight of my losses became clear. I'd given up a loving husband, a beautiful home, financial security, and social standing for one night with a man who'd used me and discarded me immediately. The therapy I finally sought was expensive, and another financial burden I could barely afford. Professional networking events became exercises in humiliation. Former colleagues would politely acknowledge me, but keep conversations short, clearly uncomfortable associating with someone whose personal life had become such a public disaster. Business relationships I'd built over years evaporated as people distanced themselves from the scandal. The legal fees from the divorce consumed what little money I'd received in the settlement. Atlas's lawyer had been thorough and aggressive, ensuring I paid a heavy price for my adultery. I had to take out loans just to cover basic living expenses, adding debt to my growing list of problems. Meanwhile, Atlas started dating Quinn, a 26-year-old engineer from his company. She understood his work, shared his interests, and appreciated his thoughtful nature. I saw them together at a cafe a month after our divorce, and Atlas looked genuinely happy in a way I'd never seen before. Quinn was everything I hadn't been: loyal, supportive, and grateful for his love. The contrast between their happiness and my misery was painful to witness. Atlas had quickly found someone who valued what he offered, while I remained alone and increasingly desperate. Every social media post of their adventures together was a reminder of what I'd thrown away and could never get back. 6 months after the divorce, I learned that Atlas and Quinn were engaged. They'd moved into a beautiful house together and were planning a wedding for the following year. Atlas looked radiant in their engagement photos, genuinely happy with someone who appreciated his love and devotion. The life I could have had was now someone else's reality. Kieran also got engaged around the same time to his lawyer girlfriend. They were planning a destination wedding in Italy, and she was everything I wasn't: young, successful, and apparently satisfied with one man's love. Both of my former lovers had found happiness with women who valued what they offered, while I remained alone with the consequences of my choices. I tried dating through apps, but every man I met was disappointing compared to Atlas. None of them were as attentive, romantic, or reliable as the husband I'd betrayed. They wanted casual relationships or disappeared when they learned about my recent divorce and the circumstances surrounding it. I found myself missing everything about Atlas that I'd taken for granted: his morning coffee routine, the way he'd listen to my problems, his thoughtful gifts and planned surprises. I'd been so focused on what was missing that I'd never appreciated what I actually had with him. I attempted to reach out to Atlas several times, apologizing and asking for another chance. I promised to cut all contact with Kieran and work on our marriage if he'd forgive me. But Atlas said the trust was broken forever, that he could never look at me without remembering how I'd betrayed him on our anniversary. Atlas told me the problem wasn't just the cheating, but the elaborate lies and deception while he planned a romantic celebration for us. He said I'd made him feel like a fool for loving and trusting me, and that some betrayals couldn't be forgiven no matter how much someone apologized. I tried to get his family to intervene, but they were just as hurt and disappointed as he was. His mother said she'd welcomed me as a daughter and felt personally betrayed by my actions. They'd all loved me and supported our marriage, and I'd thrown their love and acceptance away for one night with a man who didn't care about me. The worst part was realizing that Atlas and I could have worked through our problems if I'd been honest about my feelings. We could have gone to counseling, taken a trip together, or found ways to bring more excitement into our marriage. Instead, I'd chosen to lie and cheat, destroying any possibility of rebuilding our relationship. My professional life suffered as much as my personal life. The story of my anniversary affair had spread through my industry, and potential employers were hesitant to hire someone with such a damaged reputation. I had to take lower-paying positions and accept that my career would probably never recover from the scandal. Socially, I became completely isolated. Former friends didn't invite me to gatherings anymore because they disapproved of my behavior or felt uncomfortable around someone who'd cheated on such a good husband. Even single friends didn't understand why I'd left Atlas for someone who obviously didn't want a relationship. My family remained disappointed and ashamed of my choices. My mother said she'd raised me better than to betray a devoted husband, and my siblings avoided discussing my situation at family gatherings. I felt like an outcast even among people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The financial consequences were devastating. I'd become accustomed to the comfortable lifestyle Atlas provided, but now I was struggling to pay rent on a studio apartment. I had to sell jewelry and furniture just to cover basic expenses, and I couldn't afford the clothes or activities I'd enjoyed during my marriage. 6 months after the divorce, I learned that Atlas and Quinn were engaged. They'd moved into a beautiful house together and were planning a wedding for the following year. Atlas looked radiant in their engagement photos, genuinely happy with someone who appreciated his love and devotion. Kieran also got engaged around the same time to his lawyer girlfriend. They were planning a destination wedding in Italy, and she was everything I wasn't: young, successful, and apparently satisfied with one man's love. Both of my former lovers had found happiness with women who valued what they offered. I spent my evenings scrolling through their social media posts, torturing myself with images of their perfect relationships. They both looked content and fulfilled in ways they'd never achieved with me. I realized I'd been the problem in both relationships, expecting perfection while offering nothing but criticism and betrayal in return. The isolation became overwhelming. I'd sit alone in my tiny apartment, remembering the life I'd thrown away for one night of passion with someone who'd used me. Atlas had built us a beautiful home, planned wonderful vacations, and loved me unconditionally. I'd repaid his devotion by sleeping with my ex on our anniversary. Now I'm sitting here alone, watching my ex-husband build a happy life with someone who deserves his love, while the man I betrayed him for starts a family with someone else. Sometimes I think about how different things could have been if I'd never responded to Kieran's message, if I'd focused on appreciating Atlas instead of comparing him to fantasies from my past. Maybe if I'd been honest with Atlas about feeling restless, we could have worked together to bring more excitement into our marriage. Perhaps if I'd gone to counseling or taken a trip together, I would have rediscovered what made me fall for him originally. But I chose deception and betrayal instead of communication and compromise. I tell myself that passion matters, that I deserve to feel alive and desired in my marriage. But now I understand that real love isn't just about excitement, it's about trust, commitment, and choosing the same person every day, even when it's difficult. Atlas offered me that kind of love, and I threw it away for a fantasy that lasted one night. The hardest part is accepting that I did this to myself. I can't blame Atlas for being boring, or Kieran for being selfish. I made every choice that led to this isolation, from responding to that first message, to lying about girls' night out, to spending our anniversary with another man. I destroyed my own happiness, and deserve to face the consequences alone. Sometimes I wonder if Atlas thinks about me, if he ever misses anything about our marriage, or feels sorry for how everything ended. But then I see him with Quinn, laughing and planning their future together, and I know he's exactly where he should be. He found someone who appreciates his love instead of taking it for granted, someone who chooses him every day instead of chasing fantasies about other men. I lost the best thing that ever happened to me for one night, with someone who saw me as entertainment. Now I'm 30 years old, divorced, alone, and unemployable, while my ex-husband builds the life we could have had with someone who deserves it. Maybe I was wrong to
Subscribe to never miss a new story.